Have you ever actually stopped to wonder who sets your mortgage rate? I mean, really sets it? If you think it was just chosen by your friendly local bank or, directly by the Federal Reserve, you'd actually be mistaken. Your rate, and honestly, the financial fate of millions of us, comes from a market most Americans have literally never looked at once in their entire lives. It's this invisible financial machine that most people just completely ignore, yet it touches every single dollar in your financial life. Okay, let's dive into this. What you're looking at right here is a $145 trillion machine. 145 trillion. That is the size of the global bond market. This absolutely staggering pile of money is just quietly humming in the background every single day, pricing your mortgage, your car loan, the job security your employer offers, and yep, your retirement account. It's not just some abstract number on a screen. It is the underlying current of the entire global economy. So, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're decoding that invisible machine. We're going to stop pretending the bond market is just some boring finance topic reserved for Wall Street insiders. Instead, we're going to look at it for what it truly is: the invisible machinery pulling the levers of our daily lives. And by the end of our time together, you'll know exactly what every move in this market costs you or saves you in actual real-world dollars. Here's how we're going to break this all down today. First, the trillion-dollar machine. Then, the golden rule. Third, the 10-year Treasury effect. After that, the danger of duration. Next up, the ultimate recession predictor. And finally, number 6, outsmarting your savings account. Let's get right into it. Part 1. The trillion-dollar machine. So, to understand how this machine dictates your wealth, we first need to define exactly what a bond is and really grasp the massive scale at which governments are operating today. A bond is, very simply, a loan. When a government or a company needs money, instead of going to a bank, they borrow it from investors. Investors like you. The process is super straightforward. You hand over a fixed amount, called the principal. In return, they promise to pay you a fixed interest payment every year, known as the coupon. And finally, you get your original principal back on a specific date, which is the maturity. That's it. That's the whole instrument. But what makes this so powerful is the sheer scale of it all. Think about this. The U.S. government has a national debt of over $39.2 trillion. The interest payment alone on that debt is roughly $1.05 trillion a year. That's $2.88 billion every single day just in interest. The government literally spends more on interest than it does on national defense. And the rate it pays on all that debt, well, it's set by the very same market that prices your home loan. All right, part 2, the golden rule. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what's going on behind the scenes. There is exactly one unbreakable, mechanical rule of the bond market that you absolutely must know. I mean, it explains almost every financial disaster we're going to cover today. Here it is. When interest rates rise, the price of existing bonds falls. When rates fall, the price of existing bonds rises. They move in opposite directions every single time without exception. Think about it like a seesaw. Suppose you buy a $1,000 bond paying 3% interest, right? That gives you $30 a year. But a few months later, the government starts issuing new bonds that pay 5%, meaning $50 a year for that exact same $1,000. Now, if you try to sell your 3% bond, nobody is going to pay you $1,000 for it. Why would they? They could just go buy the new one and get more money. So the only way you can sell yours is to drop the price until your $30 payout feels like a 5% return to the buyer. Mathematically, that means you're dropping the price of your bond to about $600. So on paper, your $1,000 investment just plummeted. Moving right along to part 3, the 10-year Treasury effect. Now that you know the rule, let's connect this massive macroeconomy directly to your wallet. We do this by looking at the most important bond in the world, the 10-year U.S. Treasury, which was recently yielding around 4.5%. You see, when your bank offers you a mortgage, they don't just, invent a number out of thin air. They look at the 10-year Treasury and ask themselves, why would I lend money to a regular person for 30 years when I can lend it to the U.S. government for 10 years, totally risk-free, at 4.5%? Well, they wouldn't. So they add roughly 2 percentage points to compensate for the risk that you might lose your job or default. Let's look at Brian's situation here. We have the exact same $400,000 loan on the exact same house for the exact same buyer. In January 2021, the 30-year fixed rate was 2.65%, making his payment $1,612 a month. But by October 2023, because Treasury yields surged, that rate hit 7.79%, pushing his payment up to $2,877 a month. Over the life of the loan, that invisible bond market handed Brian a $455,349 bill, and they never even sent him an invoice. Just incredible. Part 4. The danger of duration. Now, what's really interesting about this is that this invisible machine doesn't just dictate mortgages. we need to talk about how it absolutely destroyed the safe part of millions of retirement portfolios back in 2022. For decades, the classic 60-40 portfolio, 60% stocks, 40% bonds, that was sold as the sensible default. The bonds were supposed to be the seatbelt. But in 2022, the Federal Reserve raised rates incredibly fast. And remember our golden rule? When rates rise, bond prices fall. Because rates rose so fast, both stocks and bonds actually crashed at the exact same time. The S&P 500 fell 18.1%, while the broad U.S. aggregate bond index lost 13%. But look at that bottom stat. Long-dated zero-coupon Treasury bonds lost an astonishing 39.2%. According to an analysis from Santa Clara University, 2022 was literally the worst year for long-duration U.S. bonds, going all the way back to 1754. The seatbelt didn't catch anyone, guys. It was bolted to the same crash. So the crucial point here is understanding why some bond funds fell 13% while others plummeted nearly 40%. It all comes down to a single word printed on every bond fund's fact sheet: duration. Duration is basically a rough estimate of how much a fund is going to lose for every 1 percentage point rise in interest rates. Unlike individual bonds, bond funds never actually mature. They're a basket of bonds being repriced every single day. So if rates rise, the losses hit your statement immediately and they stay there. Duration is essentially the difference between walking away with a small financial bruise or a broken leg. Let's walk through the math to see exactly how this hits a retirement account. Imagine a retiree with $500,000 in what she completely thinks is a safe bond fund. If interest rates rise by just a single 1% and her fund has a standard duration of 6, she loses $30,000. Painful? Yes, for sure. But what if she bought a long-dated Treasury fund with a duration of 17? That exact same 1% rate rise costs her $85,000. It's the same retiree, the same $500K, and the same market move, but it's a $55,000 difference in losses simply because she didn't check the duration number on her fact sheet. And you can't really blame her. Most people just stopped reading when they were told bonds are safe. Let's move to part 5 and see how this builds. The ultimate recession predictor. So we've seen how the bond market dictates personal portfolios, right? But it also acts as this infallible check engine light for the entire U.S. economy. Normally, if you lock your money up for 30 years, you'd expect a higher interest rate than if you only locked it up for 3 months, just because there's way more risk over that much time. But occasionally, the market completely flips upside down, and short-term yields actually rise above long-term yields. This is what we call an inverted yield curve. When the 2-year Treasury starts paying more than the 10-year Treasury, the bond market is essentially screaming a prediction. It expects the economy to slow down so much that the Federal Reserve will be forced to cut rates just to save it. And according to the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, this signal is 10 for 10. Every single U.S. recession since 1955 was preceded by an inverted yield curve. Literally no other economic indicator comes close to that kind of perfect record. Finally, part 6, outsmarting your savings account. All right, now that we've decoded this invisible machine, let's pivot to exactly how you can use this knowledge right now to get better returns on your hard-earned cash without taking on any extra risk. Take a look at these yield comparisons. The national average savings account at most large banks pays a measly 0.38%. Meanwhile, 3-month U.S. Treasury bills recently yielded 3.71%, and high-yield savings accounts sit around 4.20%. Keep in mind, all 3 of these are incredibly safe. They're either backed directly by the U.S. Treasury or they're FDIC insured. Let's bring our guy Brian back for a second. If Brian has $50,000 sitting in his average neighborhood bank, earning 0.38%, he makes $190 a year. But if he moved that identical principal to 3-month T-bills at 3.71%, he'd earn $1,855 a year. Just by ignoring the bond market, leaving that money at the local bank costs Brian over $8,300 in lost interest over 5 years. And hey, that's not even counting the fact that T-bills interest is totally exempt from state income tax. Now, if inflation specifically is what's keeping you up at night, the U.S. Treasury has another pretty cool tool: Series I savings bonds. These pay a composite rate that automatically adjusts with inflation. Recently, the rate in effect through October 2026 was sitting at 4.26%. Now, there is a catch: a strict $10,000 annual purchase limit per person through Treasury Direct. But for cash that absolutely needs to keep up with the rising cost of living, I-bonds are simply the most direct inflation hedge available to a regular saver today. So look, we have to stop pretending the bond market is just some boring finance topic meant only for Wall Street insiders. It is the invisible engine driving your mortgage, your savings, and your retirement. So I'm challenging you today. Go log into your accounts, find your bond fund's duration, and compare your bank's yield to a simple T-bill. See what you're actually getting. But I also want to leave you with this to think about. If this $145 trillion machine has predicted every single recession for the last 70 years with absolutely flawless accuracy, what is it trying to tell us about tomorrow? And more importantly, are you positioned for it? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you guys next time.